Hello and welcome to Dianna's Writing Desk, where we discuss everything to do with writing, independent publishing, books, creativity, as well as general observations of life. All the world is a stage. Information about this podcast and a list of upcoming episodes, as well as all of my books, can be found on my website, diannahardy.com. Welcome to episode 2 of Dianna's Writing Desk, where I'm going to be talking about burnout, what it feels like, what led to my burnout, and ultimately how I overcame it. I'd like to preface this episode by saying that everything I'm going to talk about is my own experience of burnout. I think that it's going to feel different for everyone that goes through it. There are going to be a different set of circumstances that led to it. The solution to it will probably also be slightly different to each individual person. I went online and read quite a few articles at the time when I realized that what I was going through was burnout, and I came across just a couple of pieces that I found quite helpful, but ultimately it was me who pulled myself through it. Now, my burnout was something that I didn't realise was burnout until maybe 1.5 or 2 years later after it had happened. And there was a lot that led up to it. There was a very intense period of my life from 2009, when my daughter was born, to 2014, and even a little bit after that. 2009 was a very emotional year. The birth of your first child is always going to be emotional. A week, 10 days after my daughter was born, my mum and my sister came down to visit, to see her, and my mum told me for the first time at that time that she had been diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. That was quite a thing to hear, but life went on. My mum got her treatments, and I threw myself into the first few years of being a mother. And I think anybody who is a mother knows that those first 2-3 years are quite an experience in itself, something that you perhaps cannot prepare for, because even though you hear stories, you hear other people tell you what it's like, you just don't know until you're there doing it for yourself. Those first 3 years were quite tumultuous. That was 2009 to 2012. I began writing and publishing books at the end of 2010 and received some acknowledgement for my books from around 2012 onwards. So things were really taking off in a way. But it was towards the end of 2012 when my partner's mother was taken into hospital, and she didn't come back out. She did pass away at the end of 2012 in hospital. Obviously, this was a very sad time. I think that my mother's cancer was in remission at that time, but fast forward to 2013 and it had come back. Heading into 2014, my mother was not doing so well, and she passed away mid-February 2014. For myself, obviously, this was a very sad time. My mother was like my best friend. She and I were very, very close growing up, and explaining to my daughter as well, I think she was 3.5 at that time, maybe 4, was a challenge in itself. And then, of course, the preparations for the funeral and everything. But in June 2014, my partner's father passed away, which, it's kind of like a double whammy, isn't it? It's 2 sets of things that you have to go through. Arranging that funeral as well as trying to sell 2 family homes. So there was quite a lot that was going on. Towards the end of 2014, we're talking around December time, my daughter, who was, I think, 5 years old, 5.5 at this point, started to kind of play up a little bit. She was expressing very angry emotions. She had a tic and so on. And, we weren't quite knowing what to do with this at this stage. I was really just thinking, we've been through such a lot. It's in some ways no surprise to me that she is emotionally just expressing everything that we've been through. But fast forward to April 2015, and this was now affecting her schooling. So we did go to the GP, and we did go through a process where we made an appointment to have her see someone potentially for a diagnosis of autism. I can't even remember at this point whether we had sold any of the family homes. We were just about to sell one, and I think the other one was still on the market. So that was going on at the same time as we were dealing with everything else. And the reason that I'm sort of going through this timeline with you is literally just to kind of lay out a story, if you like. Burnout doesn't come out of nowhere, and in my case there were many factors leading up to it that all culminated without me really realizing that it was culminating. Throughout all this time, I was still writing my books. I was trying to bring out 2 books a year. My writing was, in one sense, something that I looked forward to and was helping to keep me going, but in another sense, I was starting to feel tired from everything, I guess, and the writing in itself, it was becoming a little bit more difficult to get into the routine of it, to sit down and get that creativity out. And I was naturally finding around 2015 that my creativity was wanting to be expressed or needing to be expressed through different avenues that didn't require such an analytical process as writing does. I mean, it is both a left brain and a right brain thing, writing. It's not just creativity and instinct and intuition and so on. It is, there is a certain amount of logic and reason and preparation and management that needs to go into it. And I was finding that I needed to channel my creativity in different ways. So there was a part of me that was already at that point seeking out a solution to my feelings, my growing feelings of exhaustion. But at that time, I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And I didn't realize that the exhaustion was potentially going to grow into quite a big thing. We moved house in summer 2016. So this is on the tail of selling the family homes. And at this point, I was still writing. And then in 2017, I was planning to write, and I did write the very last book in the Eye of the Storm series, which was Reign of the Wolf. I knew that book was going to be long. It was the last book in quite a kind of epic series where a lot had happened, and I knew it was going to be a long book. It ended up being around 110,000 words. That was the only book I wrote that year. Now, my feelings around writing that book were quite immense. It was the last book in my best-selling series, which I was very nervous about writing, partly because it was the last book and how readers would react to it. I felt it had to be really good. But also partly it's the last book in my best-selling series. So what happens after that? What do people buy after that? I was already aware that I was heading towards a kind of cliff that I was about to step off. And at the end of this cliff, there was potentially a place I landed in where there would be no payment, no royalties, no financial reward. So I was kind of battling with those feelings actually as well when I started to write the last book of that series. But I did write it. I was looking forward to writing it, but I was also a little bit terrified of writing it. And at this point, while I was writing this series, in our new house now, and having, had it all set up and having our daughter in a new school. And by this time, she had received her diagnosis of autism. So there was all of that to come to terms with as well. I was really starting to feel the exhaustion. I was belting out these words for Reign of the Wolf. I was really glad that I had not committed to writing any other books at this time. But I was really feeling the exhaustion. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I just knew that I needed to get to the end of this book. At this point in 2017, when I'm writing Reign of the Wolf, what I'm actually doing is working through my burnout. I realised that what I had was burnout around the beginning of 2016. I think it was just before the house move. I didn't know it was burnout until I tapped into the feelings, the feeling of what I was going through. Burnout for me felt hot, arid, scorching, like I was all dried up inside. It felt a little bit like dehydration, but from the inside out. Even though, I didn't feel dehydrated in my mouth and my skin was okay, my pallor was okay, inside it was like my internal organs were all shrunk up. I felt like if I have to take one more step forward in any direction, I might just disintegrate into a pile of ash. That's what burnout felt for me, and it felt very, very different to anything I had experienced before. I have experienced depression before. I don't think I've had very, very severe depression. I would say maybe medium. When I was around 17, 18 years old, I did fall into that. And I would say for me, depression felt like it was like a swamp. It was like you're trying to wade through or swim through muddy waters or clay. And it's a different kind of exhaustion where you're just trying to pull yourself through sludge. It's like you kind of don't want to carry on. You kind of wake up in the morning and you don't want to wake up. You just want to put your head back under the covers and just stay there and let the world go on by without you. It's extremely difficult to get yourself motivated into the day and into wanting to be there. That's what depression felt like for me. Burnout felt very, very different. The exhaustion was there, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. And I wanted to get up. I wanted to be integrated in life. I wanted to do all the things that I wanted to do, very much so, but my body and the way that I felt inside meant that I couldn't, meant that it was extremely difficult. And there was this slight feeling of fear inside that, I might not be able to take that next step, because like I said, the feeling, even though it's an illusion, the feeling was that I might just crumble into a pile of dust or something. It is like you're in a desert, crawling through a desert, trying to find water. That's what burnout felt like for me. It was not a comfortable feeling, but when I acknowledged that that's what it felt like, that kind of hot, arid feeling inside, that's when something clicked in my mind and I thought to myself, oh, burnout. That's what it feels like. I'd heard of burnout before, though never really read up on it, but that's the word that came to mind for me when I tapped into how I was actually feeling inside. So I went and I read up on it, and a lot of it matched things that I'd gone through and what I was actually feeling. My way of working through burnout, especially because I recognized that it came upon me because of everything that had taken place in the previous 5 years or so, it was a lot of forcing myself to slow down. I think the change in location, actually moving to a different house in a completely different town, I think that really helped. That helped to shift gears in me. No matter how exhausted I was feeling, it shifted things so that I could form different perspectives about how I wanted to move forward. It was like the new start that we needed and that I needed to shift myself out of this burnout. So even though I was absolutely exhausted at the time I was writing the last book of the Eye of the Storm series, that book was also me working through my burnout. It was a slow process. Like I said, I didn't plan any other books that year, just that one. It was a strange journey, really, that book. It was amazing to write the last book of a series. But it was also, there was one other series I'd finished before, the Witching Pen series, and writing the last book of that series was equally a wonderful, fulfilling feeling. But I didn't have the burnout then, of course. Here, I was really feeling that exhaustion. And after I finished writing Reign of the Wolf, that came out end of 2017, I don't think I wrote anything in 2018. Oh, no, I did, didn't I? I wrote Aftershock and Blood Shadow. But my goodness, it's almost like I barely remember writing them because I was shattered. I was really, really tired at this stage. Even though there was a part of me that was invigorated by being in a new town and a new place and, meeting other authors and so on in this new location, there was a part of me that was absolutely exhausted. I wrote Aftershock and Blood Shadow, and I was trying to write Autumn's Fall, which never got finished. I'm still only a third way of the way through that book. I also, at the beginning of 2019, brought out Blanket of Snow. Now, I think I purposely, on some level, subconsciously, left them as unfinished pieces. So Autumn's Fall is unfinished, and Blanket of Snow was always going to be the beginning of a series of novelettes. And that was the first one. And then I veered away from writing altogether. It wasn't intended, but I think I had reached that point where I had to properly acknowledge that burnout. As much as I loved writing, loved it so much that I did not want to pull away from it at all, not even a little bit. I had to acknowledge that I needed to kind of heal, because I had healed a little. I'd worked through it with the writing, but there was still a ways to go. I needed to remove myself completely. So I did. And from that point until about 3 months ago, I didn't write at all. That was about 4.5 years of not writing. I went a different route with my creativity. I reacquainted myself with my more spiritual path, holistic health and wellness practice that I used to do many, many years ago. I reacquainted myself with all of that, and I threw my creativity into that area. It was very healing for me, despite the whole COVID pandemic thing hitting, which, of course was unexpected. If I'm going to look at that in a very positive light, is that it forced me not to go back into writing. It forced me to stay with the holistic health and wellness stuff that I was doing and actually see that through into some kind of fruition. And I'm still doing that. I'm still doing that now and seeing clients for that and enjoying that work. But it has come full circle and led me back to writing, because I am in a more healed place now where I can put myself in front of my words, and I can utilize both that left brain and that right brain and start to sit down and actually get stories out again, which, by God, I have really missed. I have missed a lot. So that is where I am now, and I do feel that I have healed from the burnout. I don't feel I have burnout anymore. I think it was a long process to heal from it, and my advice to anybody who is going through any kind of burnout is don't be afraid to pull back from what it is that you're doing, because that's the hardest thing. Is me pulling back from my writing was agony, because I loved it so much. I was so involved with my writing. I love writing fiction that it was, it took wild horses to drag me away. And I finally had to acknowledge, whether I liked it or not, in 2019, that I just needed a break. I had to do something else. I couldn't just keep putting in and putting in and putting in and putting in. I needed a break. So that's my first piece of advice, I think, for anybody going through burnout, is don't be afraid to pull right back and pour your creativity into something else. My sort of fear was that if I pulled away from writing, I wouldn't be able to get back into it. My fear was that if I ended my writing career, my fear was that it would end, that if by pulling away from writing altogether, my writing career would literally come to an end. And, my partner, who has always been so completely supportive of everything that I do, he was like, but you're still an author, even if you're not writing, your books are still out there. They're already there. It's like nothing's changed, and I'm standing there going, but it might end everything. That was the feeling inside. And I very much had to overcome that fear and face the fact that I might not write again, because that's what it felt like inside. And I did face that. I basically drew a line under it and thought, well, so be it. If that's the way it goes, so be it. At least I finished the series that I wanted to. I'm going to take a chance and walk away from it and see what happens next. And that is what I did. I didn't kind of fully know that I would be coming back to the writing, especially in the crux of, the pandemic and the lockdowns and stuff, where I was thinking to myself, well, I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen here with society in general. Everything was up in the air for everybody, wasn't it? And it was a kind of a case of, well, maybe I actually won't go back into writing. I have no idea what's going to happen next. It was only about 3 months ago that suddenly something clicked, and I sat in front of the laptop and I wrote the second novelette to the After the Storm series. So Blanket of Snow was the first book I put out there in 2019 and thought, right, well, I'm just not going to finish that mini series now. But then I went back to it 3 months ago and I wrote the second one, Twisted Roots, and I've nearly finished the third one now, Sins of the Father, and the fourth one will be out end of this year, I'm pretty certain. I am slowly getting myself back on track and very much grateful that I found my way back to writing. And I think that's the key, is trust that your creativity, wherever it takes you, wherever you need it to be, will lead you back to whatever place you are supposed to be in the future, that it will lead you back to the right place. Burnout isn't fun. It's a really horrible feeling. It's just as horrible as depression, but just a different end of that spectrum, I think. There aren't a lot of words that I can think of to describe it other than what I've already said in this podcast, but trust is a big thing, and moving away from what it is that you can no longer do, the position that you can no longer put yourself in that is causing the burnout in some ways, or at least not helping it, not being afraid to move away from that is very, very important. Sort of facing your fears head on, really, and exploring this new version of who you are and who you want to become. Those are really, really important elements, I think, that I found for me were important in overcoming my burnout. And my hope now, what I'm striving for, is now that I come back here and I'm back doing the writing, that it's going to be a more stable process for me, that it is more relaxed, that perhaps I won't feel so bad just putting out one book a year, like one full-length novel, for example, instead of scrambling to get 2 or 3 out. I don't want to do that. I'd love to start a new series that is nothing to do with any of the characters that I've already written. I'd love to write a standalone novel. I have always been somebody who is brimming with ideas. I've never had writer's block in the traditional sense where, your ideas are blocked and you don't know, you can't bring the muse forward and sit down, the words aren't coming. I've never had that. I've always been chock-a-block full of ideas, and sitting down is not a problem. Getting the words out is not a problem. What did become a problem for me was the exhaustion and fatigue and emotional kind of wring out from everything, combined with the emotions that I would feel when I was really into a book writing my characters. These are pretty intense emotions as well, and there wasn't enough inside me to feel those emotions as well as everything that I'd been through. I really needed a break. I would love to hear your ideas of burnout. If you have been through burnout, if you have come out the other side, I would love to hear how it was for you. Did you feel that kind of hot, arid desert kind of feeling inside? Was that what your exhaustion felt like? What got you through it? Where are you at now? I'd love to know these things, because like I said, I do feel that burnout is different for each individual person. But I wanted to talk about it because I think it's important to let other people know that other people have been through this, especially if you are someone who if you're an author, if you're a writer and you love the process of writing or whatever it is that you might be doing, and the burnout is quite a thing that gets in the way of that. It can get your fear up as to, well, what are you going to do next? Because there can be this moment of career change. You might have to change your whole career in order to get over the burnout or heal the burnout, or whatever your situation is. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. I hope this episode has been interesting for some people listening, that it has helped you in some way or another. Like I said, do let me know. I'd love your feedback. And I shall be back next episode, where I think I'm going to talk about writing novellas and novelettes and the art of the short story, and what a rewarding thing it is to write short fiction. So until then, have a lovely week, and I shall see you next week.